particularly the ethics area. So, for example, if you're looking at lawyers, certainly community leaders centres, the professional code for lawyers is, some of you may argue this send a chill up this line, but the ethical standards for lawyers are quite close to ours, right? And of course lawyers, we all know, are very ethical people. Okay. There's also been calls for self-regulation and for state regulation. And this hasn't just been an area, but it's also been across the human service. And I'll come back to that one a little bit later. That said, there's been a complex codification in most professions looking at professional conduct. Why is that important? It's important for a number of reasons. Not to say that, and I'm not trying to imply in any way that our ethical code is counterproductive. I think it's critical for organisations such as ours to have a clear statement about what's right and morally right and what is not. The trouble is that we know from numerous research studies that when people have ethical issues or ethical dilemmas, they tend not to go to codes. Right? In fact, they don't, either organisational codes or professional codes. That doesn't mean you don't have ethical codes. What it means is you actually have to have other ways to help people work their way through ethical issues. Okay, those of you who I've dealt with, either to see up here on the left, the manager says the project post-mortem will only be helpful if each of you is honest about what went wrong. And then you see the guy on the left says, your colossal ineptitude as a leader suppressed our natural talents, leaving us listless and unfocused. And the boss then says, and by honest, I mean blaming people who aren't here. And the guy then says, look, I'm doing it again. I really like to, I teach, one of the areas I teach in is management. And for me, Dilbert really captures the difference between the rhetoric and what actually happens in practice. It does it very well. Okay, let's have a quick look at the practice field variations. Because the sort of generalisations I've made earlier don't necessarily apply in particular practice fields. That said, what we do know is that there are, when you look sort of, when taken overall, there's quite a bit of overlap in the general approaches and methods that are taken. And that's one of the strengths of social work for me, is the sort of person-environment framework that we offer. That is quite unique. Other disciplines don't offer that. So certainly the psychs, they tend to just look at the person and often in an intrapsychic way too. There are different circumstances and contexts in different fields. And if we just try and look at social work as a whole, we actually make a mistake. We can lump it all in together and miss things. One of the things that specialisations do allow us is to have a legitimacy and an influence. Right? So, if you're practising social work in an oncology context, that could be a real specialisation where you can develop very significant skills and knowledge. And I'm not arguing against, in fact, it's arguable. In fact, one of the problems, and Sue's certainly working on this with the eligibility, there is a lot of tensions for us at the moment about whether the 4-year standard generic and generalist model that we've had forever, whether that any longer allows us to be, to have the flexibility that's needed. And I know I'm digressing a bit here, but it's quite an important debate. The debate basically says that the level of specialisation that is now needed isn't properly addressed with a 4-year degree. So some particular fields, including child protection and health in particular, are arguing that people are not coming out of a 4-year degree with the sort of skills and knowledge base that they need. It's not just them, it's domestic violence, there's a whole range of people who are saying, hey, new graduates, we have to train them. I would argue, yeah, you do. That's right, that's part of what you've got to do. And it isn't just the responsibility of the educators, it's actually industry has an obligation to train people as well. But it's an important point about whether we need actually greater flexibility. One of the things our National Mental Health Committee is doing, and they're doing some great work in the Medicare stuff that you'll be reading about later, in later bulletins, about basically trying to get us back to have a chair at the table as a profession. One of the things that they're doing in particular is looking at the sorts of ways that we can offer higher level qualifications in order for us to have a bigger say at both a clinical and practice level, but also at a policy level. I think actually I had a friend say this to me. They said, look, that a doctor had said to them, you know, that you don't do your 4 years or your 6 years of medical training and then come out and expect to be able to do brain surgery. You know, that you actually just see the first degree as to just the basic stuff, and then you've got to specialise in others. But we've actually tended to see our 4-year degree as that you can do everything. And I think we need to really look at that and critically examine about to what extent is that accurate. There are some issues that are more particularly related to health. There's always been to health, it's always been there, but it's particularly acute at the moment. And it's been driven by a number of things, a number of quite rapid changes in our health system, and some of the difficulties we're having with our health system meeting needs. But professional boundaries and knowledge skills issues are really at the forefront in health. And I think so is the push for registration. Registration in that clinical area is much more an issue than it, say, is in the youth work or even child protection for that matter, and community-based services. It's not such a big issue. I'm not saying it is an issue, I'm just saying it's certainly a much bigger issue in health. Okay. One of the things we need to watch out for is that although practice fields give us an opportunity as professionals to develop real expertise in particular areas, one of the problems is they can become havens for orthodoxy, where you just get a one view about the way of the world. And that's actually quite dangerous for us because the world continues to change. And I'll give you one example. I think but it exists in others, is the area of domestic and family violence. One of the things that's happened for domestic and family violence services is that the initial push to get and the necessary push to problematise the whole area and to get the groundswell of support for social programs to deal with that. Once that was successful, I think there was a problem that the analysis and the debates didn't then go on to look at, well, how do we address this in a more holistic area?